What is
that I
it?
got this fancy bottle dispenser for Christmas.
Ooh,
Got the cock loaded in it,
nice.
ready to go.
It wasn't that fancy. Do you know how to use it?
I think I plugged it on accident.
You making a
Shit.
cocktail, or is that just neat?
I was gonna put in my coffee, but
You know,
it's not coming out. So I have to figure out why.
it's a good one, Jake. I was impressed with that.
A podcast about bourbon and the ones who drink it. This is Bourbon Matters. Welcome to Bourbon Matters. I'm Jake.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Gold Eagle Jake.
Happy New Year, boys.
Happy
Welcome
New
to
Year.
2025 and Rye January,
Rye January.
as we were just discussing. Dan, what did you say about Rye January?
I said it should probably be February, so it's the shortest month possible. But I said it's only slightly better than dry January.
That is the worst take I've ever heard from a former distiller. How about that?
Former. It's so sad. Yesterday was a sad day.
Yeah. Bet you cried.
And what was Dan's last barrel that he distilled?
Rye, because that's what we've been doing for the last month and a half.
Yeah, so going out with a bang.
I went out with, before that, we've done, the last 12 barrels we did were rye, but the previous 106 we did were blue popcorn. So big
Very
year
nice.
for blue popcorn.
Yeah.
Well, you should say big year in 4 years, right?
5 years.
5 years.
They're not going to put stuff out under 5 years too much more, I don't think. So
Are you wearing the bourbon shirt?
He is.
Okay.
do you like
For
how I
a second,
Superman that right there?
Yeah, for a second I thought it was the Rye shirt.
I
was gonna say you were the biggest hypocrite in the history of the world, but
I wore the
you
rye
saved
shirt as a
yourself
work
on
shirt.
that one.
That was a work shirt because it got all dirty. I didn't care about it nearly as much.
So yeah, Rye January. We're celebrating all month long at Gold Eagle.
Gold Eagle.
First plug of the year.
First plug of the year, 4 minutes into the podcast.
12% off all rye whiskey. Where are you going to find that? And then come try any of our store pick ryes for just $1 at the bar.
There's a lot of good ones.
Yeah. All right.
I'll save
That's
my
good. I
comments.
had to get a plug in.
I'll save my comments.
I was itching. It's been a couple of weeks since we've recorded.
Yeah, it's been a few weeks off. We're in 2025. Jake, how are we starting off 2025 with topics?
So we're gonna talk about what we want to see this year in whiskey. You're the one that suggested it, so you can go first, Dan.
I get to.
I did. I
Yeah,
think.
Jake technically did.
did
I
you?
just said
Okay.
for today. So Jake,
then
why don't
Jake
you go
can
first?
start.
Well, I figured there's a fully loaded question, and there's a lot of different layers to it, and we can just kind of bounce around and discuss some different things. I think the most obvious, and there's also a lot of layers to this, but everyone's probably thinking this as their top thing that they want to see, not just us, but all other consumers as well, is more special releases from distilleries. Obviously, we've already kind of started to see a little bit more. What are you chuckling about, Dan?
I want to go after you're done with your statements and what you want to see for 2025.
Do you want to see less whiskey being
I
produced?
want to see less, but yes,
You
we'll
want to
get
see
that.
less rye being
Yes,
produced.
we'll talk about that later, but I want to have a counterpoint right to start the year off with, correct?
So, more special releases, and I don't just mean, we want more Pappy, we want more BTAC. Obviously, everybody wants more of that stuff. But what I really kind of mean by that is start planning properly for the future. I think we are starting to see the market get a little bit saturated. No surprise really there. There's a lot of, it's a really good thing because things like Booker's are available right now. Things like Maker's Heart Release are available right now. These are things in the past that would sell out in a second. And to be fair, we used to only receive about 6 bottles of each of these types of releases, and I think this year we got like 30 cases of each near the end of the year. Probably a distributor thing hooking us up. But obviously there was more floating around, and they're starting to place it, thankfully, I think less in grocery stores and big chain stores and a little bit more to some of their better independents, I think.
And the other obvious one there that shows that trend is, leaning towards true is Elijah Craig Barrel Proof is just on shelves in a lot of places now. And
that's unfortunately not with us. We only received 2 cases of that C release.
Yeah, that's lame.
Yeah, Jake's been cheating on you at other liquor stores that you hate to talk about. So.
I bought mine directly from Heaven Hill.
Yeah, but you sent us a picture from a rival.
Yeah, I know. But I didn't pick one of those up. It was just...
Heaven Hill's doing a really good job increasing what people want. They're putting more of their own whiskey into these special releases. They're letting stuff age. We know they have the biggest, selection to choose from, especially that they're independently owned. They don't need to respond to anyone else but themselves. But I would like to see more of these bigger distilleries start planning more for the next 5-10 years, because if stuff like Booker's and Maker's Heart Releases are starting to sit a little bit on shelves, and Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, Larceny Barrel Proof, what's it going to look like in 5 years when there's much more of that stuff? So let's start planning more for Parker's Heritage. Let's start planning more for the BTAC and the Pappy releases, and saving more whiskey and keeping, I don't want to say keeping the hype alive, but just keeping the interest peaked from the consumer.
Yeah, I think that's a good one.
You redeemed yourself a little bit on that.
Thank you.
Not much, but a little.
And so to kind of piggyback off that a little bit, I also want to see like more experimental releases. I think distilleries, for some reason, have gone away from that. Like Jefferson's used to have an experimental wood collection that they would release with the same whiskey finish in 5 different types of wood. I don't know if Buffalo Trace is just keeping all this for the gift shop, but they used to do a lot more experimental releases. And I think with all the experimentation going on right now, and all of these distilleries like Bardstown ramping up so many different mash bills and different types of oak, and different cooperage partnerships, not all of this stuff is going to be good. Not all of it's going to be sought after, but I think as a consumer, we want to see what's out there, and we want to, experience these different flavors that are going on behind the scenes at these distilleries. So I definitely would like to see some sort of experimental tasting kit releases from some of these big distilleries. I think that would draw a lot of demand from the consumer.
Part of me is thinking the opposite on that, of just because I bought one of the Jefferson wood experiments. I've done I have we all 3 of us have the 4 Roses, 10 different mash bills, something. I think you're not seeing as many of them anymore because I don't think they sold as well as they wanted them to.
As far as I know, I think they sold out. Well, everything we got sold out fast.
So that was so maybe around here, when I used to go to Ohio all the time for work, I could walk into any liquor store and find the Jefferson stuff on the shelf. I've still seen a lot of the 4 Roses stuff sitting on the shelf. That could be a price point thing. But I think maybe part of that's they didn't move as well as they wanted to. Now, that's not. I still think you have a perfect location and a perfect customer base for a lot of whiskey things, but I think outside of that realm, some of this other stuff is still sitting a little bit.
What would you rather see the distilleries do with that whiskey? Would you rather them
I
blend
have
it
my
all
ideas.
and finish it in Calvados? And
I have my thoughts on that, and I will discuss that when I get a chance to talk about my
Go
look forward
ahead.
to 2020.
Go ahead.
Go
Buddy,
ahead.
keep going,
Let's
man.
go.
You're doing
No,
great.
this is open discussion. This is open
open
discussion.
discussion.
Yes.
So,
Well, before Dan starts, you said, the one thing I want to piggyback off of is I agree. I want to see more cool experimentation. We talked a lot about that in the Chattanooga episode, and like the stuff that they're doing is really cool. We last episode we talked about the Isla cask finish. I think that's a super cool untapped barrel finish that we haven't really seen much of in bourbon and American whiskey in general. I'd like to see more Isla cask finishes, or like something that's a little bit more off the beaten path than just sweet fruit wine finishes.
Which, sorry, just to interrupt for 1 second, I just want to mention that Isla Cask Chattanooga, because I didn't get to mention this before, but you guys know it was my whiskey of the year, and recently tried it in a couple cocktails. Complete game changer. If you like a smoked old fashioned, I know you had it in old fashioned, Jake. I had it in a paper plain. It's just a smoked cocktail without the smoke.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I would highly recommend it. All right, now
Yeah,
Dan.
sure.
now I
Go
get
ahead and
to
tear
I get to shit.
everything we set apart.
Yeah. So, like, I guess if people were hoping my New Year's resolution was to be less of a prick or curmudgeon, that's not the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't
Let's
think
just-
people were hoping that. I don't think they care.
My first note was, what do I want to see from whiskey companies in 2025? And I just wrote less. And when you first started, I thought we were going to be completely different, but some of the points you talk about, I bring up in here. But like the first thing I want to see less of is super rare and super expensive releases. I'm tired of that. I think the market is growing tired of that. And the reason I say that is I know sometime this year we'll do another reboot of Has Whiskey Peaked, and we can just prove more how I'm right. But one of the things that we saw in the industry in 2024 was the super premium whiskeys, the whiskeys over $100, which had been carrying the majority of the growth in the whiskey game the last couple of years and was having over double-digit growth every year, has shrunken to only a few percentage points growth in 2024 over 2023, which means that you're still like they're still going to sell out very quickly, but the market that's looking for that is getting smaller and smaller. So those one-off, super rare, super exclusive, super expensive things are really starting to go down. I want to see less of that, and using the whiskey that they're using in those to do other projects with.
Yeah.
What do you mean other projects?
I will discuss. It's in my list. I have notes. I actually typed up notes for this today. So you just settle your horses down.
So before you jump into that question,
Yeah,
I want to say I agree with you, Dan. I would also like to see that whiskey repurposed, or at least less of those like ultra rare, ultra special, limited releases. But I think you and Jake are actually saying the same thing in different ways.
Somewhat, yes. And I'll talk about where we're overlapping a little bit.
Yeah,
somewhat. I want to
both of
see
you are
more of
saying
the
you'd
super
like to see-
premium.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I
Okay.
mean, you're both saying that you'd like more accessibility
Yes.
to like the core product lines, which
Yes.
is what my number one thing
That's
for
what
the year
I'm getting
was.
to. So that means, obviously, odd man out. Gold Eagle Jake is the loser in this conversation. We haven't even got into it that deep, which is awesome. I actually want to see less tinkering. Like, I want to stop wasting good whiskey on trying to find the next like crazy finish. Like we went through the Amberana finish a couple of years ago, and then it's been the Calvados is big lately. Mizunara is big. Let's stop like trying to find like the next big thing that everyone's going to copy. Let's stop trying to find the next it product. Hey, you're gonna hear me say this in a weird way. Let's stop trying to find the next rare grain in a whiskey. if you haven't been able to find it by this point, because everyone's been doing a lot of experiments over the last 5-10 years because the whiskey boom's been going crazy.
What are you talking about, like different strains of corn and different strains of wheat and rye and barley and whatnot?
There's like, it's such a niche novelty thing, and even at Whiskey Acres, like, they know what they're going to be making the next few years. Like, there's nothing. They're going to be having more and more in older age statements of the favorites. Some of the product lines are going to be discontinued, and there's not very many new product lines coming out. They're going to focus more on perfecting what they have.
See, if I could pause you for a second, I agree with that. I do think it is almost too late to find the next big thing just because of how many distilleries are out there and how it has, there's the stuff that people really want is starting to get back out on the shelves. But I do think as a whiskey drinker, and I think most whiskey drinkers will agree with me, that we're curious and we want to taste different things that are out there. We want our palate to experience different flavors. So I'm not necessarily saying we need more corn varietals. We need more different types of oak to finish in. But every distillery is working on something behind the scenes. Why not put out a little 500 ml sample kit of what they're kind of working on, get some customer feedback, get the customers involved in what the distillery is doing, and go from there.
Yeah. Well, I think to kind of synthesize what you both are saying, like for a craft distiller like Whiskey Acres, that strategy makes a lot of sense, like sticking to what you're really good at and fine tuning. But like the Big Six did that 100 years ago, and they're sitting on stockpiles that craft distillers, will never be able to produce in their lifetimes. So they're the ones that should be tinkering a little bit more with not necessarily the mash bills, but like the finishes and things like that, to try and find what best complements their particular products. Like, that doesn't mean that Buffalo Trace needs to put out an Amberana and a Mizunara and a Chinkapin oak and all this other bullshit, but like they maybe, I don't know, I'm just making something up.
No, I think that was a perfect point.
Yeah, because like maybe Orange Curacao is the best thing that they can finish their whiskey in.
That's not the case for anybody.
Have a Buffalo Trace finished in Orange Curacao on the shelf.
Some people might argue with you, Dan, but it's complete separate.
I'm just making that up, but like,
no, I totally agree. It's a completely separate conversation for a small craft distillery versus the Big Six, especially now with how many distilleries are out there. We know 5 to 10 years, a lot of these smaller distilleries are really going to struggle. So now is the time to perfect and just make more of what you're doing well.
Yeah.
I want to see less blenders because I think they're going to really struggle coming very soon. But what I want to see besides the less is we've talked about it before in some of our Has Whiskey Peak things. Or no, we did an episode on like the whiskey glut. Like, we're basically getting into the heart of when everyone started to produce lots and lots of whiskey. We're going to be sitting on a lot, which means, and if it's not selling, which the numbers are not showing that it's continuing to sell at growth and it's actually starting to shrink a little bit, like, let's spend more time perfecting things. And even with the Big Six. So I have some examples of companies that have done this, and we can continue to go down this path. But now that we have more whiskey, let's start blending in some older stuff to our batches. And think of like Knob Creek, how they took away the age label and then put it back on.
Put it, yeah. And same with Elijah Craig too. But
let's start going even older because we're going to have a lot of whiskey that we got to use up. So let's start to put older stuff in it. Let's start to focus more on blending when we're making our batches. And we've talked. I just put an example, Blue Run. We've talked about how it's a pricier whiskey and it's not worth the cost. Let's figure out how to make that, if we're going to keep that same price point, which they probably have to because of the fancy bottle, Like, let's spend a lot more time instead of trying to try all these different mash bills and try all these different things to focus on getting the best possible batch we can get because now we have a ton of whiskey. Let's focus on the barrels that we're putting in each blend. Let's look at our proof points. So, it was a while ago, but Jack Daniels didn't used to be 80 proof. It used to be 90 proof, and then they kept taking it down and taking it down. What proof point does our whiskey taste the best at? Let's tinker that way. Like if we're using a higher proof point, we're using up more whiskey, which is good. We're going to be sitting on a glut. So does it make sense to have a higher proof point to get the whiskey to taste better?
I think that's actually a really good one.
I know, because I thought of it. But we've seen how much a difference a proof point makes at the one blind tasting we did at Gold Eagle. How it can completely change is where does your whiskey taste the best? Do we need to look at raising up a couple proof points and we're going to be sitting on a ton of whiskey? Then let's do that if it tastes better. Let's give the consumer better flagship products.
I agree. I think to piggyback off of that too, I think the average palate for whiskey drinkers now wants higher proof and can handle higher proof because 15 years ago there was nothing really over 120. A few oddballs like Booker's existed, but nothing was really over 120. Everything was pretty much at that 90-ish range. Mm-hmm. And I think I was talking to somebody at the bar yesterday, and they were like, man, every single one of these things I try, when I try it blind, I always guess a much lower proof than what it is. And got me thinking, like, hey, I think that's just our palates developing. We're drinking a lot more whiskey neat, which wasn't, 10 years ago, people pretty much, for the most part, drank it over ice or in cocktails.
Which so shouldn't be that low proof if you're using it in cocktails anyway.
But I think, our palates have developed to like higher proof, so it would be really cool to see. Makers did it with Makers 101. What if Elijah Craig came out and said, hey, instead of 94, we're going to do an Elijah Craig 108 proof or 107 proof? Like, this is
bonded.
Yeah, 12-year 107 proof whiskey. It's going to cost $15 more than our standard 94 proof.
Right, and you have the whiskey to make it available for people can go and buy it because it'll be sitting on a shelf because there's enough of it.
Yeah,
that's some of the things I want to see, and it's like, as the whiskey market has matured and got into it more, when people are first starting to get into whiskey, one of the first whiskeys people mention is like, if someone was talking to either of you guys and they said, I want a very easy drinking whiskey, what's one of the first ones you point to is Basil Hayden. It's not offensive flavor. It's not hard to drink. It's low proof. But none of us are drinking Basil Hayden. Like, once you get into whiskey, you never look at Basil Hayden again. Let's start looking at proof points on these things. Jack at 80 proof is way too low. Let's bring it back to where it used to be in the 80s and 90s, which was, like 84, 86?
Yeah, but I think on those mass-produced handle bottles, we'll call them, there's still going to be a bigger market for that 80 proof.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you want to have that, but you could have Jack 80, Jack 90, Jack Bond. Which, as well as Gentleman Jack. No, the Gentleman Jack
is like 94, I think. But they did come out with the bonded, but maybe a different distillery would be a better example. I don't know.
But I just use Jack because they've dropped proof point and then brought it back up. And that's probably the main reason they dropped proof point. Price.
Save money.
Yeah.
Save whiskey.
Elijah Craig is a good example where, like, most people... Of course it is. Well, fine. What do you want me to talk about? Buffalo Trace at 90 proof? Like, no one who buys Buffalo Trace is going to be using that in a cocktail or to mix with Coke. I mean, some people might. You need
your low cost whiskeys out there. I'm not saying get rid of Jack 80, but let's have some Jack at some different prices or other. Whiskeys. I'm not just focused on Jack, but
but I think it is dependent on distillery. Like, because Jack has a reputation for being a mixer, so leave that product alone.
Yep, and that's why the low end of the market, the cheapest whiskeys, that's been flat this entire time. Like, they might have gone up 1% in growth during the whiskey boom, but the low-cost whiskeys are staying there. I'm talking about that $30 range. Let's play around with the price a little bit. now that we have so much whiskey that we're going to be sitting on, is our whiskey the right price? And the first one I thought of to think about is Old Elk. Like, I love Old Elk whiskey, but I don't think a lot of it's worth the price. So do we need to keep Old Elk, some of the stuff at 70, 80, 90 bucks, or should we look at dropping the price because we're sitting on so much, or have older stuff in the whiskey?
Well, I can tell you, if you're looking for less, the prices are all going to go up.
Not if you're sitting on whiskey. Because if you're sitting on whiskey, all it's going to do is lose whiskey as it ages.
Well, if you're talking about a general decline in the amount of available whiskey on the shelf.
That's not going to see. That'll always be the same because there's so much whiskey sitting in rick houses right now. Like, the amount of whiskey on the shelves isn't going to decline. The amount of barrels that they have is going to increase because it's not going to be selling any faster.
Right, so you're not saying you want to see less whiskey produced overall.
It should be, but we're on a massive glut. So you're either going to have to start using older stuff in your blends anyways, or lose it.
Right. Okay. So, that's what I'm trying to say.
Which goes back to my original point. Let stuff age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's come out with some more age statements. Let's come out with more of our highest end releases, because that's what people really want. And we won't have to worry about our core stuff not moving.
See, that's where we disagree a little bit, and that's where I answered the question you originally asked, is what do you want me to see if we're not making these one-off, super rare, super expensive things? Let's start to make what the people want, which is that mid-tier whiskey available. The Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. Let's start Buffalo Trace. You have enough whiskey now. Let's start putting your flagship product line out and available. Let's start seeing those, not one-offs, but like your different big batches. So for Elijah Craig and Larceny, it's your A batch, your B batch, your C batch. Let's make those available, because that, with the super rare, super premium market share going down, let's focus on that premium and that it's the premium and the high-end premium, I think is what they were called.
Like, if you think about it, it's like completely asinine that Four Roses has pretty much every one of their core products on the shelf every day, right? Excluding the single barrels.
And they all
the
have
regular, the small batch, and the small batch select.
Yeah, I mean that's perfect planning on Four Roses, and pretty much they're whoever
Hill's moving towards that. Jim Beam, they the other day they had Knob 18 out on the shelf at one of the big box stores. Knob 12 is more regularly available. That's still kind of a seasonal release, but even 15 is on the shelf when that's also released seasonally. What are the other ones?
Those are the things,
everybody seems to be moving in this direction except Buffalo Trace, and there's no excuse that Eagle Rare can't just be out on the shelf every day, at all, to me. So
but that's the range I want to look at, is those exact style things of having those more available, because those are more your daily drinkers, and to not have to hunt and to be able to find some of those things that the people want of those levels. The Knob 12, the Knob 15, we can start to make that more and more available now. Let's start to make that stuff available that everyone can get it. So it's not just the people that either spend a ton at a store or know a guy or things like that can get it. Let's get some of those whiskeys that I think that's the range of what people want more than if I can spend $60 to $90 on these batch releases like this that you only see a few times a year. I'd rather see that than some one-off thing that a couple thousand people in the U.S. are going to be able to try. And I think that's where I want to see this stuff. And that's why I want to see less of stock used for those rare things and more for the stuff that I think the general public is actually really wanting to get now.
See, I mean, obviously we want more of that stuff, but I'm going to defend. In my eyes, I think most of the people out there that I know that would rather have one bottle of something ultra premium than probably 5 bottles, maybe even 10 bottles in their collection right now.
Oh, see, I would take a bunch of Elijah Craig batch proof releases, over one $300 bottle that I'm only going to drink every once in a while on special occasions. Like you definitely need one of those bottles to have, but let's face it, the people that have a lot of these super rare, super exclusive things are the people that have all the super rare, super exclusive things. Yeah, Jake.
I mean, I don't know. That's kind of like a more personal preference, but I think the bottom line we can all agree on is yes, we need more of these different special releases, if you will. Let's start planning for those and allocating more of our time at the distilleries on how they can achieve that.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest takeaway so far of this discussion.
It's not a discussion. It's an ass whooping.
You're the only one that's turning this into a contest.
Right?
You guys know me, right? Like, you know that I'm competitive, correct? All right, we're fair.
But, I mean, there should be better inventory management, if you will, of what the distilleries have on hand and how they're actually allocating that into their product lines. I think that's...
And if you talk to distillers,
summary, right?
They're going to be more on my side of things. If you talk to people
because it complicates things.
If you talk to people that are at the people in distilleries that are in sales, they want the super rare, super premium because they know they'll sell out.
You just said the data doesn't support that.
It's going the opposite way. It's starting to show that it isn't. But what they'll do though when they do that is, let's say they're making something super rare, super expensive and they're doing 3,000 bottles of it, and then they start to see it sit for a little bit. Next time they do it, they're going to do 2,500 bottles.
Yeah, but
it's at the end of the day, the distilleries will be able to sell it. The question is, when does it start to sit at stores and it starts to affect the inventory sitting on a floor at an actual liquor store? Because Jake, what's the first thing that's going to happen if you have something that sits forever and doesn't sell? You're not going to reorder.
Right.
I mean, it depends on what it is, but yeah, I mean, there's a fine line for us as a store, and there's also a fine line as a distillery, because they don't want their special releases sitting on shelves because the consumer, once they can get it, they don't want it as much anymore.
Right.
But I mean, a good thing to touch on, I think, is what Russell's is doing and get feedback on that, because they are releasing a little bit more ultra premium and they are raising the prices a lot on their ultra premiums, like the Russell's Rickhouse, the Russell's 15. Those are both $250-ish bottles.
That's crazy to me.
And their 10-year sits on the shelf at $35.
Yeah, like that to me, like doesn't really.
But they won't sit. And people are hunting them.
They sell.
The market for that is getting smaller and smaller, though. I think you're going to see you're still going to have your people that have the cash flow to handle all that stuff. They can buy that stuff whenever it comes out. But where they're really starting to lose traction on that super expensive whiskey is the ones of people that were buying a couple of them because they wanted to have them, and now they're looking at all the money they have tied up in whiskey that's just sitting on their own shelf at home. And you're starting to see those people shy away from some of those purchases and focus more on like that mid tier.
Yeah, I don't know. I still think a lot of people that I talk to are in that boat of, they say they have a lot of whiskey and they're not going to drink it all. And so they're only looking for those ultra premium bottles now.
Yeah, but I think that's the people that I'm talking about that have the money to handle those things too, though.
Well, and I think everybody, or at least those kind of enthusiasts, know that we're looking down this whiskey glut, and that the stuff that they otherwise might be looking for will be available in the next couple of years. So why keep looking for that, and spending money on it when it's just going to be there all the time? Like, I don't think I own a bottle of Granddad Bottled in Bond because it's always going to be there. So if I ever have a inkling to get it, I know I can just go get it whenever I want,
Cool. All right, I got one more thing that I think is pretty interesting. Well, two more things, but one of them is kind of a quick point because we've already kind of touched on it. I talked about wanting more tasting kits, and I think to take that a step further, more tasting kits with more information. QR code in there with like a virtual tasting led by the distiller. How easy would that be for a distiller? It would take them one day of filming, editing, putting that all together, and the consumers would absolutely love that. So I think
more knowledge.
Yeah. It's time to step that up a little bit from especially these bigger distilleries. And then to also piggyback off of that, I want to see more at the physical distilleries. I want to see more experiences designed for the connoisseur. It seems like a lot of the tours, especially at the bigger distilleries in Kentucky, while they are very informative, a lot of them are very repetitive and geared more at the person who is learning about bourbon for the first time or early in their bourbon experience. So
I don't need 6 distilleries or 12 distilleries to tell me how bourbon is made.
Right, and the laws of bourbon.
Yeah.
The one downside of that is like a lot of times there is you're going on a tour with a significant other, and one may be really into whiskey and one may not be really into whiskey.
So
and you
gotta
hit both of them up.
So Dan, I'm gonna use 2 examples that you're gonna hate, but Bardstown Bourbon Company.
I thought that tour was great.
No, and Heaven Hill, they both offer like different levels of experience. Heaven Hill does have a connoisseur experience.
That's what we did.
Honestly, I don't think it's that good though. You just go into a little room and they still kind of teach you the basics of bourbon, and you get to try some really, really high end good stuff, which makes it worth it. But it doesn't really go beyond that. Bardstown Bourbon Company offers a sensory experience, a barrel thieving experience. I think the sensory experience is extremely cool to be able to taste and smell different teas and spices and chocolate, whatever, and then taste the whiskey and learn more about what you're tasting and why you're tasting it instead of just thinking about tasting notes. So I think with where we are today, there's so many people out there who are extremely well educated in bourbon, and I'm talking the average person who doesn't work in the industry. There's going to be a lot of people who are coming into retirement or looking for something to do on the side. So I think distilleries right now more than ever need to step up their experience when you come and visit and maybe offer different types of levels of classes so that depending on who you're going with, if you are going with that significant other, you can do a basic one. If you're going with bourbon buddies, you can do one of those sensory connoisseur experiences. Because I think the basic tour that most distilleries are offering is just old for a lot of people, and it's more of just bouncing around distillery to distillery looking for special release bottles at the gift shops,
which isn't fun.
I mean, it's whatever, but it's kind of, you're just driving around all day looking for bottles instead of actually learning and experiencing what the distillery has to offer.
Yeah, I mean, like it would be cool to do like almost like a barrel pick experience, but you don't end up picking a barrel. You just try a bunch of different single barrels and talk about the differences or something. Yeah, that would be cool. You know, like
so. I did one of my projects that I worked on at the distillery I did a ton of tour research, and I talked to a couple different craft distilleries that were doing because we're looking into doing like a barrel thieving tour and things like that, or a bottle your own. So I talked to different craft distilleries and different smaller distilleries in Kentucky. And the one thing I noticed when I was doing tour research, you're seeing actually less people offering thieving and bottle your own, and more people starting to offer cocktail classes.
Yeah,
that's what the market's more. The majority of the market is leaning towards, and the reason is, and that's why I think they need to do some reimagining of how they handle their basic tours. Could use an overhaul, but like a cocktail class changes every few months, and you can give it a new experience.
Yeah.
The big thing you get in Kentucky though, and one of the distilleries I talked to in Kentucky, they said that like when they first started doing a bottle your own style tour, it was good until every distillery in a 60-mile radius had bottle your own, and then it just sits because you've gone somewhere else and bottled your own. Because a lot of people, when they do these tours, especially in Kentucky, focusing more on the Kentucky style things, it's different in different states. Well, if everyone in Kentucky offers the same thing, you're not going to do a bottle of your own at every single place. And the majority of people that do those are wanting to go see the distilleries and just drink. Like, we're a different crowd, but the majority of people that are going to be going down to Kentucky to do a small bourbon trail where they're going to hit 3 or 4 distilleries over a day or two are there because they want the basics and they just care about drinking afterwards.
Yeah.
And we even see that in Illinois, because when I've done a few tours, like, there's people there that don't give a shit about what you're saying. They just want to drink at the end.
Well, yeah, you're going to have those people.
But that's about half the crowd in the tours.
Yeah, I would say it's about split.
Yeah.
Like, some people are just there to have fun and drink and get drunk, and but the other half that like wants to learn, wants to know more, and they don't need the 101s of bourbon, and it's just kind of boring.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's where, like, I think getting those different levels is good.
But you have those, but some of them are starting to get rid of the different levels and just going back to the basics and having a cocktail class.
Well, I mean, like, if we're talking about different things, I think, like, if you're talking about a small distillery, yes, there's no reason to have 6 different tour agendas. But
even the big ones are are going back to that. Like, that's the biggest thing I found when I was going.
Like,
yeah, I think that's dumb.
Like, they should,
but that's us. Like, we got to think of the
different
general public
experiences available.
Because the people listening to us are going to agree wholeheartedly. But, like, when you talk to these distilleries, they're like, yeah, at first it was big, and then all of a sudden it just died. And now we're going to these different things. But us, the people listening to us, are all probably going to be on the same page. But the general people that do this are different than us. And that's not what they're looking for.
I think more and more in the future, there's going to be more demand for those connoisseur tastings and different experiences, because just more and more people are going to learn about it and get into it.
Well, so this feeds into my other big ask for the year, which is increased transparency from distilleries. I would like to see those, like, top tier kind of tours or experiences really give you more information on what's going on and, like, tell you more the nuances of, like, their distillation process or their barreling process or the aging process or whatever, like, makes their distillery unique, and do, like, deep dives. Or, like, what was a couple years ago when Buffalo Trace was doing their big expansion project, they had, like, hard hat tours, which is really cool to me. Like, that
they still have those. They still have different
okay.
They still got a lot of different levels of tours.
But, like, that's like cool. Like, going out into the distillery in, like, a small group and, like, talking to, like, people that are actually making the whiskey is, like, would be a really cool experience. Going into the rick houses, stuff like that,
talking more about the relationship between the cooperage, the relationship between the farmers, and where you get the grain from. I think things like that, like Maker's Mark offers an agriculture tour where they take you out on a little ATV thing out to their farm and show you where they get their wheat from. So I think things like that, like beyond bourbon, beyond drinking, like beyond the knowledge of bourbon, like, let's get some knowledge on the backstory and more about what's all involved in this process.
Yeah.
And you got to remember to kind of feed off of both of those last 2 points. 5-10 years ago, none of these distilleries had restaurants or bars. Like, you couldn't drink at any of the distilleries unless you got on a tour and got a couple samples after. So I think we're still in that phase of distilleries figuring out how to be a tourism destination, because that just wasn't a thing for them for the past however many decades they've been around. Nobody really wanted to go visit distilleries. So
But the expectation was you would spend an hour max there.
Yeah, you would go to the tour, you would get a couple little samples in plastic cups, and you would be on your way. There was no restaurant there, there was no bar there was no cocktails. You'd go to the gift shop and you would leave. So I think it's time to invest some serious resources into bringing in the right people, maybe to plan and get these different experiences up and going.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be the one thing they're going to need to focus on is like the restaurant side of things, because there's already, you're starting to hear of some of the like large craft and medium-sized craft having to do that to keep the doors open.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. Like almost every time I go to Kentucky, I must stop at either Willet or Jim Beam because they have amazing restaurants on site with amazing cocktails, great, phenomenal farm to table food at both of these places. So I do think that's a huge draw, is to have a legit restaurant or cocktail bar on site.
Well, and that was like, we probably would have spent more time at Bardstown because they had the cocktail bar. We got there on a Sunday. What day was that? Yeah, it was a Sunday, right?
Sunday.
So the restaurant wasn't open yet, but like, had we not been on like a regimented scheduled tour, we probably would have hung out there for, a while. But like that kind of stuff, like Dan's distillery concept of having like a campground or like, stuff like that, that's like creates like a more of a destination, I think is what a lot of these places need to start looking at and really thinking about. Is like, you really should want people to stay at your distillery for like 5 hours and like get dinner or lunch and like have a few cocktails and buy shit in the gift shop, like hang out for a while, because then they spend more money with you. And
you spend a lot of money to get people to come in, and then when they're there, you want to squeeze every dime out of them that you can.
Right.
Which, that's any company. That's not a distillery thing.
That's why, like, the like small to mid-sized craft distilleries are fun, and like breweries are fun, because it's like usually there's like a good atmosphere to like hang out there. They have live music or food trucks or like something else, happening that you can like have cocktails and hang out and like chill with your friends and listen to music or whatever, there's like more of an experience there than a lot of these big distilleries. So I think it's a good one. I'm glad that one came up, because we haven't talked about that since our like distillery, dream distillery episode, like it's almost probably 6 months ago. So
yes. Well, we'll see what all happens in 2025. We'll see what's going to happen with the industry here. Because it is, alcohol across the board is basically down, except for a couple of very small, unique categories. So it's going to be a very interesting year to see what happens.
Yeah, I think we'll see a bounce back. Maybe not this year, but maybe next year. Fingers crossed.
You're seeing a lot of distilleries starting to cut production.
Well, it's a fully loaded question.
Overall, I'd like to see the whole economy bounce back.
We're about to start a whole nother episode if we get into this right now.
Oh, we gonna do politics episode?
You can stay on after we leave and record.
Today is January 4th. Jesus. All right. Well, Jake, could you please plug Gold Eagle again for us?
Yes, thank you, Dan. Well, yeah, before I plug Gold Eagle, just want to thank the listeners, and I also want to ask, let us know what we forgot. Let us know what you want to see in 2025 from distilleries or the industry or whatever from us. Yeah. But yeah, Rye January is going on. You can go to goldeaglewine.com, order any rye whiskey, get 12% off automatically, or come try any of our store picks at the bar for just $1. Follow us on Facebook at Gold Eagle spirits, follow us on Instagram at Gold Eagle Wine, and come check us out in Libertyville and belly up to the bar. Say hi to Drew.
Hi, Drew.
Hi, Drew.
What's up, Drew? Drew does listen.
Is he forced to help our numbers?
No, nope.
Okay.
he's a willful listener.
He says that while he's shackled right now
Yeah.
behind the bar. Sorry, Drew. Sorry that you have to work for Jake.
If he didn't like it, he doesn't have to do it.
Jake, where can people listen to some of our other podcasts, such as our Dream Distillery episodes or any other ones we might have talked about this episode?
Yeah, you can watch us or watch us on Spotify and YouTube. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple, Google, and every other podcast platform pretty much. Also check out Movie Matters. This week we're doing our 2024 wrap up, talking about our favorite and least favorite movies we watched this year or past year. And then January, we're doing all listener recommendations. So next week.
If you're going to plug it, you at least got to give me one of your favorites, one of your least favorites of the last year.
Okay, so one of my favorites was a movie called The Vanishing, which was it's actually a foreign film made by a Dutch director about a guy and his girlfriend. His girlfriend gets kidnapped and murdered, and he tries to find out what happened to her. Super interesting movie. I'd highly recommend it. If you can, I think I've watched it for free, so you can find it somewhere. Least favorite movie was Dirty Dancing because it was god awful. And a lot of people are probably going to be upset about that, but that's okay. So next week we're watching The Beast of War, which was recommended by a listener through Instagram. Also, Midnight Madness was a listener from Instagram. And then someone at Kevin's work recommended The Burbs. So those are the three we're watching for the rest of January.
Nice.
So check that out. It's available on all the same places: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and all that stuff.
Fun times. All right, boys. Happy New Year. Cheers to the new year. We'll see you in the next episode.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.